Alexander McCall Smith is having a pretty good year. Pretty good career, too. And it's about to get even better. McCall Smith is the author of the popular series of novels relating the Botswana-based adventures of Precious Ramatswe and her #1 ladies detective agency. There are about 10 books in the series, and on March 29th, his characters become flesh and blood with the premiere of an HBO show based on Smith's books. The latest book in the #1 ladies detective agency series, The Miracle at Speedy Motors, was published on March 10th, and the next one, Tea Time for the Traditionally Built, will follow on April 21st. And this isn't even McCall Smith's only series. He also writes 44 Scotland Street, as well as the Isabel Dalhousie novels and the Portuguese Irregular Verbs series. So it's a good time to be Alexander McCall Smith. And you can bet there are more than a few novelists out there who would give their right index finger to be him right about now. Alexander, welcome to Mr. Media.
Hello, thank you very much indeed.
How are you?
I'm very well indeed, very well, thank you.
Thank you for taking the time with us. And let me start here. HBO is on the phone. They'd like to adopt your novels for television. How do you respond?
Well, I think you'd normally say yes. Or you might say yes. You'd say yes, please, and then you'd say thank you very much. No, I'm very pleased they've done it because HBO has a pretty good track record of doing interesting things. And so I was very pleased that they were going to do this. The Weinstein Company, Harvey Weinstein's been very supportive, and they were the people who actually got the movie going. And then HBO and the BBC have come in as broadcasters, and they're behind the series, so to speak. So it was really a wonderful team with the Weinsteins, HBO, and the BBC, and then put that together with the late Anthony Minghella, who did the first, the pilot, the feature-length movie, and you've got a terrifically good start.
Now, there's an awful lot of novels and series out there, detective series, particularly mystery series. How did they come to your very gentle series featuring what can I say politely, a large
traditionally
woman?
Built.
Traditionally built. Thank you. Thank you very much.
That's the term.
How did they come to you? I mean, how did they find your series?
Well, I think they found the books, and I suppose the books really aren't conventional mystery books or detective books at all. There's no crime in them really. It's mostly concerned with people's problems, and I think that the books obviously were read by people who were interested in turning books into films. And I suppose they just ticked a number of boxes for them. They liked them. Harvey Weinstein himself was very fond of the books, and so I think we had a number of people there who were keen. Anthony Minghella also came to it through the books. And so I think that happens, that people develop an enthusiasm for a book or a series of books, and then they think in terms of translating that into film, and that's what happened here.
Now, I watched the 2-hour pilot for the #1 ladies detective agency, and it's extremely stylish, which is par for the course on HBO.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, I mean, there's no sex, there's no crime, there's some implied violence, and no cussing. Why is it on HBO and not a commercial network?
Well, I don't know the ins and outs of American broadcasting, so I suppose so. I really wouldn't be able to answer that terribly well, other than to say that my understanding is that HBO takes on projects which perhaps are slightly unusual, and that they have a particular a reputation in doing things which are a little bit novel. So this doesn't fit into the normal mold, so to speak, of books in which there's a lot of or series in which there's a lot of violence and strong language and so on. There's none of that. But I think people rather like that. People do like, in addition to obviously watching some of the stronger stuff, they actually do like to watch things which make them feel a bit better, or which are more optimistic. And these books are unashamedly optimistic, and and I suppose I'm a writer who deals with matters at the, how would one put it, the more positive end of the spectrum or the more gentle end of the spectrum. I'm not saying that that's the only acceptable part of the spectrum in which to work. I mean, obviously people should work all along the spectrum, but that's the area that I work in. That's the area that the books are in, and I think people enjoy that.
Mm. I know. I watched through the movie, and I thought at times early on I thought, well, this would be great. I could maybe let my 12-year-old daughter watch this. There's not much on HBO I can let her see, but I kept thinking, okay, soon there's going to be the sex, or soon there's going to be the violence, and it's all going to go to hell. And it never happened. And I thought, great, I really can give her this to watch.
Well, that's right. You see, I think I find this with the books that often when I do events and I meet lots of my readers all over the world, people come along and they say, well, we're sharing these books between our children and our parents. So you get 3 generations read the same book. Which I find I'm very, very happy about that. And I think that you can get the whole family, you can get 3 generations of a family can sit down and watch this, because there's no bad language, and there's very little violence. I mean, in fact, there isn't really violence at all. So there's nothing there which would distress either a younger generation or an older generation. 3 generations can sit. This is 3 generation stuff.
How did you feel about the pilot when you saw the finished product?
Very, very pleased. Really, it's a wonderful film. It really is magnificent. There's so much love in it and beauty in it. Marvelous music. Botswana itself, which is where it's set, comes over so beautifully. This magnificent scenery. And that really is given a lot of breathing room in the film. Very fine performances from the actors and actresses, really magnificent performances, and a lot of humour and fun and colour. I just think it's a marvellous film. I've seen it 3 times. I saw it last night, premiere in New York, and I just felt at the end of it, I felt immensely cheered by it. I think that they've done a lovely job with it.
Are there any changes from the series to television screen?
Yes, there are 1 or 2. Obviously, television and film in general is a different medium, a different art from fiction, and has to bear in mind certain different considerations. I fully understand that, and so they have made 1 or 2 changes, which actually really are quite small. Overall, the film is recognizably the book, but they have made 1 or 2 little changes, which I'm perfectly happy about. They've introduced a couple of new characters, which actually works, in my view, very, very well. In fact, 1 of them in particular, I'm very sorry I didn't invent. I would have liked to have invented him. So I'm perfectly happy with that.
Good. Do you have any say over the TV production? Do you consult in any way?
Well, I'm described in the contract as a consultant, whatever that means. So they show me the scripts, and I read those and I'll make comments on them. But generally speaking, I've been very happy with what they've proposed to do, and I meet the producers, and I've been very, very content with their interpretation. I think I know that they're not going to do anything which is going to fundamentally change the feel of the thing. I mean, I wouldn't see any point in their doing that. I mean, that would be pointless. But they're not proposing to do that. So I'm very, very happy with their approach.
Tell me about the show's lead actress, Jill Scott. Is she the embodiment of Precious now in your mind?
Well, I think she does it magnificently. It was a very difficult role to cast. Anthony Minghella, I think, was feeling quite concerned fairly shortly before they even started, because he felt that he was having difficulty finding somebody to do this particular role. There were an awful lot of people who wanted to do it, but obviously he had to get somebody who was just right for it and who would work with the other actors and so on. And he came across Jill Scott and appointed her, I think, fairly close to the start line, so to speak. And she has been really magnificent. She does the role so well. I really am very, very impressed with her interpretation of it. I think she's got it absolutely right. Now, interestingly enough, I am one of those authors, and I suspect that there may be a comparatively small number of them who don't actually see the faces of the characters that they create. So I never had an idea of what Mara Matsui, the central character in this, looked like. So I didn't really have an idea of her face. Now, I had an idea that she's a large lady, traditionally built, as she says. So I'm aware of her as a sort of fairly large presence. But the faces of my characters, I don't actually ever see those and don't bother to look at them. It's a very, very curious thing, and I don't describe them. I don't give a detailed description. So sometimes in relation to some of my books, a reader will occasionally say, but what colour hair has so-and-so got? For example, my Scottish books, Isabel Dalhousie, who's one of my Scottish characters. People say, you've never told us what colour Isabel Dalhousie's hair is. And indeed, that's right, I haven't. So I don't actually I don't have the strong sense of what the face looks like. So it was fine for me. All the actors and actresses are fine. That's not going to change the way I see them in future books, because I've written 2 books since the film was actually made. So it hasn't really changed that.
It is interesting, isn't it, that men and women see these things so differently. I'll see a woman, on the street, and I'll remember her figure or the way she walked, and my wife will see the same woman, and she'll remember her hair color and her eyes, and so when I'm writing, I don't necessarily think about that I have to state what her hair color is. It just doesn't seem that important to me. But
that's right. I think it's very interesting. If you look at books by male authors, they tend not to describe what the characters are wearing, which is interesting. Whereas women novelists, I mean, these are gross generalizations, but I suspect that they're probably true nonetheless. Women novelists often describe what the characters are wearing. And that actually is this is one of the differences between men and women, that they notice different things. I, for example, will, if my wife and I go out for dinner, my wife will notice what the other women are wearing, and I won't remember. I'll say, well, she was wearing a dress, but not much. I do notice shoes. I notice people's shoes, interestingly enough, and one of the characters in the number one latest detective agency is she notices shoes as well, Mal Makutsi. So I actually will notice what everybody's shoes look like, and whether their shoes are adequately polished or not.
Now, for someone like myself who's been introduced to the characters via the television show, as I'm sure there'll now be millions of people who will be, one of the things that I came away from that with, and this is good for you, of course, it makes me curious and I want to go read some of the books, is in the first episode, I'm not going to give away anything serious, but her, Precious's father says to her, if you marry again, find someone who'll be nice to you. I'm paraphrasing. Yeah. And she does meet someone nice, but she doesn't seem terribly interested in marriage. And I'm wondering if the books give a little more backstory on that than the pilot does.
Without giving anything away, sure. That issue of whether or not she will marry is something which continues in the books for a considerable period. So we have quite a number of books in which that issue is there. Now,
but she was married once?
She was married in the first book. She married at a young age. She married a musician, a trumpeter called Note Makoti, who was pretty bad. He was an abusive husband, not a good husband at all. So she has one very bad initial experience in that respect, and so she's wary.
And there's several male characters in the pilot who they don't give men a very good name. Maybe that's as far as I should take it. But do you have any trouble writing those types of characters, or do they? Let me ask you this: what comes more easily, writing this gentle, sweet, brilliant woman, detective, or these really awful, creepy, low-life men.
well, there aren't too many sort of creepy, low-life men in the books. You do actually get one or two, and I don't do baddies terribly well. Actually, as an author, I think many other authors do much more credible baddies than I do. I tend to write about, I suppose most of my characters are rather gentle characters. So we do get the occasional baddie. And in fact, we've got, in the number one Ladies Detective Agency series, we've got some weak male characters, some very strong and good male characters. So I hope that I wouldn't be accused of being biased in any way.
For people who may be just joining us or maybe just discovering the show, you were born in Zimbabwe, you're educated there and in Scotland. In Scotland you became a law professor, then you went to Botswana and helped establish a law school at the University of Botswana. So how does all of this, it's a wonderful background, anyone would love to have that on their resume, but how does all this lead to the creation of the number one Ladies Detective Agency?
Well, it was because I'd lived in Botswana. I'd worked there briefly, and I suppose also I spent my childhood in that part of the world, in what is now Zimbabwe. So I think the seeds of the whole idea were there right at the beginning, and it's because I then went and lived in Botswana and got to know the country and visited Botswana every year. I had various projects there, so I would go back every year. I think that led me to eventually sit down and write about the place. I had been a writer in my spare time. I read quite a lot of other books, and so I was just doing that in my spare time before I started to write the number one Ladies Detective Agency. I had no idea, of course, when I sat down and wrote that initial story about Precious Ramotswe, that would lead to this very lengthy literary conversation between me and a country and a set of characters, but it did. And of course, I got rather caught up in that, and now we're just about to have the 10th book published, so it's been a very long literary conversation.
How much longer do you plan to continue that series? You've got so many things that you're working on.
Well, I'm under contract to write 14 of those books, the Maramatswe books, altogether. The 10th one is about to come out, so that's another 4 beyond that. And I think then I'll sit down and take stock of the situation and see whether I would want to continue with it, or whether I would, at that point, say farewell to her. But I'm certainly not planning to say farewell to Maramatswe for some time yet. So at least another 4 books.
Now it was interesting to read that you also exercise another part of your brain besides law and the novels. You play the bassoon, and I kind of wondered, what have you not yet accomplished in life that still calls out to you?
Oh, well, I'm a pretty bad musician. I must point out that although I play the bassoon, I really play it appallingly badly. I'm actually very weak. I really mean it. I'm in an orchestra called the Really Terrible Orchestra, which my wife and I founded about 10 years ago, for people who'd like to play in an orchestra but were just too hopeless to do it. And we have great fun. So I would, if I could achieve anything, I'd love to be a better musician than I am. I think I never will be, because I think one has to be much better by this stage in life. So that's something that I would like to do. I mean, I suppose that I look back in my life and I say I've done, I suppose, most of the things that I particularly wanted to do. I mean, I haven't had burning ambitions, many burning ambitions. I suppose I wanted to write, and I've been fortunate in being able to do that. So that would be my major ambition. I think that, and I count myself to be very fortunate and very lucky man to have been able to do that. So what remains? I don't know. I mean, I can't. I'm not planning to climb any mountains. I mean, there are people who say that they'd like to do Kilimanjaro, but I've got no desire to climb Mount Kilimanjaro.
Well, that narrows it down a little bit.
Yes, it does. Yes, if one can strike Kilimanjaro off the list, then life becomes more manageable.
And Are you actively writing in the other series as well, 44
Yes.
Scotland Street?
I'm currently writing Volume 6 of the Isabel Dalhousie or Sunday Philosophy Club series. Working on that. I've started the next 44 Scotland Street book, which is also Volume 6 of that series. So I've got, in fact, I've also started the next Van Egelfelt, or Portuguese Regular Verbs. So I've got three books on the go at the moment in various series.
Well, I'm sorry that you have such a hard time finding things to fill up your time, but I'm sure you'll manage.
Oh yes.
Well, folks, you can see the #1 Ladies Detective Agency beginning March 29th on HBO. It's good for the whole family. I plan to sit my daughter in front of it, and I know that she will enjoy it. And you can also order Alexander McCall Smith's books, from which the series is adapted, at great bookstores everywhere or on MrMedia.com. And you may also want to visit the author's website, www.mccallsmith.com. Alexander, you were a delightful interview, and I want to thank you so much for joining us on Mr. Media today.
Thanks very much indeed, Bob. Thank you.
Much luck with the series, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And folks, for more interviews with HBO show creators and stars, surf over to our main website, www.mrmedia.com. That's where you can listen to my earlier conversations with David Simon, creator of The Wire, Cheryl Hines and Jeff Garlin, co-stars of Curb Your Enthusiasm, as well as Michelle Borth, co-star of the late lamented Tell Me You Love Me, and many more. Please think about writing an online review of Mr. Media, casting a vote for Mr. Media, or marking Mr. Media as one of your favorites, whether you listen on Blog Talk Radio, Pointer Online, MySpace, Vox, Digital Journal, Podcast Pickle, Vox, I said Vox, didn't I? Folio, Mediafly, Podfeed.net, Blueberry, Zencast, or Odeo. Subscribe to Mr. Media on iTunes, and you'll never miss a show. Just search Mr. Media Interviews from within iTunes and subscribe for free. You can also listen with a piece of string and a tin can in many locations. If you've got an idea for a guest, email me directly at bob@andelman.com. That's ANDELMAN. You can also follow me on Facebook or on Twitter, www.twitter.com/Andelman. Thanks so much for joining us today. I always appreciate when you share a piece of your day with good old Mr. Media.